Hello, Steve White, TrekBoy89 for Steve Arts89. Well, there's a fair bit of Star Trek news articles at the moment as, we sort of head towards the final season of Star Trek Discovery premiering and all the other things being produced. So there are a few little things that sort of got my attention, but no one big story. There was an interview with Dr. Kolber. I'm suddenly blanking on the actor's name. And he did actually clarify that him and what was the name of the other character? I'm totally drawing a blank on the character. Stamets were actually married, because there was some speculation as to whether the characters were actually married or not. And I think he asked Michelle Paradise, and she said yes, they're married, definitely. But it hasn't been stated or shown on the show, but he's sort of stating that it is. And also there was some question as to whether he was the chief medical officer, and he sort of said in the interview that he is, but again I don't think there's anything in the actual show that states or establishes that. So that was interesting. There was a little bit of talk from the Enterprise crew, because a couple of cast members created the Shuttle Pod One podcast, I think it's called, and unbeknownst to me it ended because they were running right through the strikes and everything, so I didn't think anything would stop them. They had Garrett Wang on, and he couldn't talk about certain things, and it was just, but they kept going. But apparently it ended. One of them walked away, and the other one, I think they both walked away. Basically, it's end. It hasn't. If it hasn't ended already, it's ending. But they're talking about bringing it back, and apparently something about the production was untenable. And I'm like, what happened? They had a lot of other people involved, and who didn't seem to need to be there. I'm like, why don't we just have Star Trek actors? Who is this woman talking? Who are these other people? I don't know who they are. I don't know what happened, but apparently that's in flux. One thing that came up that was interesting, they interviewed Tawny Newsome, and she was saying how she wanted, hasn't happened, it's not in the planning, but she wanted Lower Decks to do a musical episode. And it occurred to me how much of a mistake it was to do the musical episode on Strange New Worlds. It would have been perfect for Lower Decks. I don't know why they didn't do it that way. It's a 20-minute show, so they don't have to fill as much time. They could have just they just could have done a complete musical parody. It wouldn't have mattered, because that show is just off the wall, and it doesn't matter in the same way that Strange New Worlds matters, because Strange New Worlds is supposed to be real. And the fact that they didn't just do a different format and do a musical format episode without having to explain we're just doing a musical episode, so that's why it's in the musical format. Instead, they found a ridiculous scientific reason for why everyone is singing, and it just was laughable and cringe and horrible. And they could have done it differently on Lower Decks, and maybe even pulled that off on Lower Decks. So that was a huge mistake, and I don't know why they didn't think of that. Why didn't they do that? But that's about it, I think. Of course, the USS Callis is coming back for one episode. They just showed a little bit of a hint on a trailer for that. And Kurtzman did sort of talk about Discovery Season 5, and that someone asked him how fan reactions affected things, and he said it did. That they sort of looked at each season and sort of looked at what resonated with fans and tried to focus on those things. And he really likes to point out and brag, because they're asking, what sort of do you feel that you achieved with the show? He said the second thing actually that came up was diversity and representation, which I do think they did a good job with. I mean, kind of. They had a few missteps. Burying their gay in the first season, and then having a 31st century character explaining to a 22nd century character what pronouns were, like they wouldn't already know. And it was just very much breaking the fourth wall and of the moment and current day politics, and not really fitting into the Star Trek universe, and it just didn't work. So there are a few moments like that didn't work, but the overall casting and the characters, having so many characters, did work. 'Cause there are a few things on Discovery that did work that are disregarded and just considered bad or bad writing, basically by homophobic and transphobic and racist people, basically, because they just hate those elements of the show as well as the other elements. There are other elements of the show that don't work, so far as the Star Trek canon and science fiction in general. But the other issues, did work on the show. There were some good qualities about the show that I don't like to acknowledge, but there were. But they're sort of outweighed by the problems. But the other thing he went into was how he sort of felt kind of proud that he'd sort of started a new sort of age of Star Trek, and everything came from Discovery. And that's the problem with every new Star Trek show. It came from this initial misconception of what Star Trek was, and why none of them really quite worked, because he won't let that go and let them be their own show. Because their idea was, well, we don't know what Star Trek is, so we'll just make different shows, and there'll be a different show for everyone, instead of just making a Star Trek show. His idea that there was no one idea of what Star Trek was, or no real Star Trek, so you could just do anything and everything and it would appeal to everyone, and that was the way to approach Star Trek, and that was a huge mistake. But that's what he's most proud of, which is interesting, because I don't think Kurtzman is evil. I don't think he tried to destroy Star Trek. He did, but I really think he tried to do his best and thought he was doing the right thing, and just had no idea what Star Trek was or how to approach it. So that was interesting. But I'm going to go. Feel free to share, like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you think of all these issues.